It is Friday, January 31st. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Year of the Snake episode of LTPS. We've got a lot going on from this past week, so let's begin, as always, with our PS Plus reminder. This is your last call to claim the January games before they go away. Get that done. This coming Tuesday on the 4th, it's going to change over to Payday 3 PS5, High on Life PS4 PS5, and Pac-Man World Repack PS4 PS5 as well. Which, this is a solid lineup, I will say. High on Life is a lot of fun if you enjoy the Rick and Morty, very crude humor, because there is so much dialogue in that game with the talking gun, and so it's something where if you don't like that stuff, and you would probably hate that game, but it's genuinely very fun with the gameplay and some of the sequences that play out. Payday 3, that game didn't really land all that well commercially or critically, but that's why it's always a good candidate for subscription, so you probably didn't pay for it then. Now you can access it with this. And Pac-Man, that game's just so fun. It's still baffling to me that we got that game as a modern port on these more recent consoles, so I'm all for that. But we have more pertinent PS Plus news that came with this announcement for the February lineup, and that is that Sony is now finally signaling the, not end, but them moving away from offering PS4 games on PlayStation Plus, which this console, or PS4 rather, is now becoming legacy at that point. So Sony did confirm that starting January 2026, they'll be focusing on offering PS5 games with the monthly titles and game catalog. So they say, and I quote here on the PS blog, "As we shift to PS5, PS4 games will no longer be a key benefit and will only be occasionally offered for PlayStation Plus monthly games and game catalog starting January 2026. We may still provide titles that can be playable on both PS4 and PS5 consoles after this date." So first off, very good notice to have a year out. I think that's a good courtesy. Two, we all know that PS4 is getting a little bit old now. It's in its legacy years. It's the outgoing platform. We're seeing more and more people shift over to PS5, so this does make sense. However, just like Sony is implying, this console is very well positioned to get Plus games not just in 2026, but probably well beyond that, because it is this long cross-gen period, and it's very different from what we saw with PS3 and Vita when they were entering their legacy years and when they had their Plus support cut off, because it was similar for a little bit in that you had a lot of games that shipped on, say, Vita, PS3, and PS4. There were cross-buy games. It very much was similar to what we have with 4 and 5 nowadays, with licenses and buying games and what you have access to, but developer support dropped off very quickly for what were one platform that wasn't doing all that well, and one of them that was really long on the tooth and also had the cell processor, so it was a lot different to ship a game on PS3 and PS4. That's why we have this long cross-gen period, but the point is, PS4 is so well positioned to really keep getting Plus games, I would argue, beyond 2026, as Sony is implying. At least more so for Extra, because Extra has hundreds of games on that service. It's not like all of a sudden the PS4 versions are getting cut off. They're just always rotating 5-plus-year-old games in and out of the service constantly. Those are clearly not going anywhere. The monthly games, I think, is more telling, because that's Sony, I guess, admitting that we don't want to have to be bogged down by this requirement of, let's say 2 out of 3 games have to be a cross-gen game, right? You're probably going to see 2026 and beyond that there's just more PS5 only games, as we have a lot of developers and publishers now moving on to just current gen. So in theory, we're going to see a lot of monthly games probably just strictly be the PS5 only titles, which that makes sense. I would be curious as to what they might do with premium, if we'll still see PS4 versions of all those classic games. In theory, the PS1, 2, and PSP stuff should still be getting PS4 versions, no problem in theory. But it does also signal that PS4 eventually might get cut off for that as well, especially if there is a theoretical future where we get PlayStation 3 local emulation, which PS4 is not going to do whatsoever. So it's news that makes sense, and if anything, PS4, it's still going to have a lot of things available via PS Plus. In other PlayStation Plus news, just a little PSA here, but right now in Asia territories, there's the Lunar New Year sale going on for PS Plus memberships. So for new members, if you sign up for Premium or Extra, you can get up to 35 or 25% off on both those tiers respectively if you're doing a full year subscription. That's going on right now, I think, but the news is that this sale is not in the West just yet. However, we're hearing that that might go live on February 14th. So I'm not sure when Sony would announce this, but it should be sometime soon if they do end up doing it, if that is to be believed. So just something to note if you're looking to re-up your subscription. Let's say it lapsed recently, don't subscribe until at least a few weeks out, and then we'll see if Sony does confirm the sale for the West. Next up, Sony has finally confirmed that today is the final day for the 30th anniversary themes on the console. So if you're watching this, then chances are it's probably already turned off on your console via a server-side change. But there is some good news here, which is Sony did say, based on the positive feedback, that they will be doing work behind the scenes to bring these special designs back in the months ahead, is what they're saying. So might be a little bit until they come back. And they did also say in a follow-up tweet that there's no additional plans for themes in the future. So, or there's no extra themes, I should say. So that tracks with what I've always thought is probably going on, which is this console is not going to get themes like PSP, Vita, 3, 4 got. The console UI is just, it's designed in such a way where the background art for your games, those are your themes. I never wanted to be right about that, but that's kind of where we're at. So 5 years in for PS5 and they're saying there's no additional themes coming. I think that is very telling. But with that in mind, the 30th anniversary stuff, don't get me wrong, I love it, it's cool. The execution could be better because, one, you've got just a floating PNG on the bottom and top of the screen, which then clashes with the key art for your games. So maybe they're looking to change that. Or also the fact that, and I don't know if I'm right about this, but I keep saying like maybe it's a very small memory budget because it does slow down UI navigation ever so slightly. And maybe that was because, oh yeah, we're not planning on keeping this around. Oh wait, now people want it. So let's go back to the drawing board and really fine-tune this thing so it doesn't impede on future system software updates or something, depending on what we want to do with the console's UI in the future if people have this turned on. Because I know it seems trivial, like, oh, just don't turn it off, but you know, they're not going to leave the boot up sequence, the shutdown sequence. I imagine they might revert the colors in the settings menu as well. Maybe it will only be for the welcome hub. I don't know what they're going to do to make it come back, but you never know with things that are technical behind the scenes. Something that seems very easy and trivial might actually be a massive pain because they didn't think this was sticking around. But either way, there's that. So yeah, it's cool that they're acknowledging it and bringing it back at some point. I do hope they at least maybe change it a little bit to where it's not as silly as it looks right now. Moving on to another surprising announcement from Asahi, and that is making PSN accounts optional for some PlayStation Studio games on PC. So recently Sony confirmed this on the PS blog where 4 games, that being Spider-Man 2, which came out today, God of War Ragnarok, The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered coming out in April, and Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, it will now be optional for a PSN account on those games, and if you do log in with the PSN ID, then you get in-game bonuses, and obviously the PlayStation overlay menu, so access to trophies, your friends list, things like that. But yeah, it seems like this might be a sort of pilot program thing, just testing it out. Obviously, we know that Sony had a lot of pushback initially from Helldivers 2, then ripping off the Band-Aid with Tsushima and other games following that. They've got a third-party agreement coming up with Midnight Murder Club, but there's also Lost Soul Side that has no PSN requirement, so they're kind of all over the place here, but I still find that if you're going to be shipping on PC, like this was an opportunity, it's kind of gone now, to ship high-quality PC ports, build this reputation long-term that, hey, the PC audience always gets these awful PC ports from other third-party studios, and they have all these insidious practices and requirements for third-party logins. It's like, hey, you know, get on this audience's good side, ship high-quality ports, don't do those things. And they kind of did that stuff anyway. And I don't know why people would, you know, back that from Sony. It's like just because those companies do it doesn't mean Sony should. It means they shouldn't. But that's just, obviously that went out the window. So maybe they're kind of circling back. I don't know if they have some telemetry from pre-orders on Steam or something that are suggesting maybe they should cool back on this PSN requirement. But for now, it's these 4 games. It's optional. I would like to see them keep it optional if they are going to eventually ship more PC games down the road. Now that's a good segue into our next story, though, which is a rumor about Sony maybe not doing PC ports for Gran Turismo 7 and Demon's Souls. This rumor comes from the forum Icon Era, where a trusted member was able to get this vetted through the admins. If you remember before, Icon Era was the first place to put up Returnal PC screenshots, and they also shared that footage of the one XDev game where it shows like a really early alpha footage of a goopy monster climbing up something. I guess that game's still coming out at some point. I know that footage was shared around Discord a lot up until when they were the first ones to put it out. But either way, what we're hearing from them this time around is that Gran Turismo 7 and Demon's Souls are not coming to PC from PlayStation Studios. That GT7 was canceled a few months ago, and Demon's Souls is not in active development. Now, it's important to remember these games were a part of that NVIDIA leak list years ago, which that list was very genuine. So many things ended up being true from that list. This also aligns with Sony's PC releases, but it is interesting, right? Even if the rumor sounds bizarre, but it's like GT7, that I could see not being a thing because that would have to be in-house. Gran Turismo is a very live servicey-esque game. It gets content updates regularly, so it's not like a standard single-player affair where you port it once and it's kind of a done deal with maybe additional patches down the road or something. I mean, the game's always seeing updates, so you would want that to be completely in-house at Polyphony, which they have not been used to doing historically. They only work on PlayStation consoles, so maybe the plan there is like they'll do it eventually for, say, Gran Turismo 8. Demon's Souls is a little bit more puzzling. There's so much financial upside from Sony to ship that on PC, especially in this climate where Elden Ring is just so big. From Software has so many more fans nowadays, and so the Origin game basically that was birthed on PS3, remade on PS5, I would be shocked if that game honestly didn't come over to PC at a certain point. More a matter of, I guess, who's handling the PC port if it is in active development, but they're suggesting that that's not happening. So either way, we'll wait and see. I mean, it's something where it's a rumor that's saying something is not going to happen, and we have to wait for it to happen. But that was something we heard about just recently. Moving on to a somewhat big leadership shakeup going on at Sony Interactive Entertainment and also the Sony Group, where Hideaki Nishino is now going to be appointed as the president and CEO of SIE effective April 1st. Herman Hulst will continue to serve as the CEO of the Studio Business Group, and he's going to report to Nishino now. And then Hiroki Totoki, the current president, COO, and CFO of the Sony Group, he will leave his chairman role at SIE and become the president and CEO of the entire Sony Group organization. Kenichiro Yoshida, the current CEO, is going to step down into a chairman role, and then Lin Tao, the current SVP of Finance and Corporate Development and Strategy at SIE, she will succeed Hiroki and become the CFO of the Sony Group as well. Hideaki Nishino provided this statement where he says, and I quote, "I am truly honored to take the helm at Sony Interactive Entertainment. Technology and creativity are two of our biggest strengths as we continue to focus on developing experiences that deliver entertainment for everyone. We will continue to grow the PlayStation community in new ways, such as IP expansion, while also delivering the best in technology innovation. I want to thank Herman for his expertise and leadership as he continues his role as CEO, Studio Business Group. I am deeply grateful for the PlayStation community and their continued support, and I am very excited for what the future holds." So this news has been really weird to watch unfold with more so the community, I guess, because it's a lot of just not understanding what is happening. Like, where's the reading comprehension? Or I don't know if it's only looking at headlines or just being very vocal about disliking Herman Hulst, but you have to bear in mind what's actually being said here. It's very particular, which is Herman is now reporting to Hideaki Nishino, but their roles aren't really changing per se. I would assume Nishino is bearing a little bit more responsibility, but it does sound as though they're just flat out saying, we didn't like the two CEO thing, the whole command and divide approach of you have your area of expertise, I have mine, and that's how we'll approach it. Because now they're just basically saying one person will report to the other, but he still has the same role, CEO of the Studios Business Group that they established last year in June when that took effect, which, mind you, back then, people are still getting this wrong. They're calling Herman and Hideaki back then co-CEOs. they're not co-CEOs. That was said specifically in the press release, that they are CEOs of their particular divisions. And he's still got that role with this most recent change. Now, one could definitely read this as he's maybe, Herman in this case is on a bit of a leash because he does have to report to Nishino, and so maybe bigger financial decisions, there is a chance that Nishino will have final say, but it reads to me as like, we didn't like the two CEO thing, we picked one person to have final say on very big important matters. If anything, I would say the concern, which it depends on if you think this is a concern or not, is Totoki-san going to the CEO of the organization in general, which anybody that's been following this for a long time knew that's where this was going. Hiroki was absolutely lined up to take the CEO position of the entire organization, and Yoshida is in this chairman role, which is probably going to be like a 1-2 year thing. It's always like a purgatory thing for a lot of companies where like the chairman role, you're not doing like full-blown day-to-day operations. He's probably going to do that for 1-2 years and retire. So it will be Hiroki Totoki that will be leading the organization, and he was previously from a CFO background. He is a bean counter. He is a numbers guy. He is looking to make the organization lean, mean, and he does not come from PlayStation, mind you. He only did that role as an interim thing until they figured out what they were doing next. So, there is some concern. That's why, like, the stock price rose with Hiroki taking this position. So, for me, I've always found, I've always appreciated with how Sony has done this over time, which is a lot of the PlayStation guys will actually leave PlayStation and go into bigger corporate roles at the Sony Group. And that's what you want, right? If we're talking about the PlayStation business, you want the PlayStation guys to end up leading Sony in general. They get the PlayStation business. They understand why it needs the backing and resources that it does. That's why it was always so cool when Kaz left SCE to lead all of the Sony Group. Having Hiroki do it, I mean, he does understand the business, but he doesn't quite understand it in a way that I think is going to be as beneficial as some would like to think. If anything, he might really sort of push for certain initiatives and things that we don't want to happen. So that I would watch carefully. I think that's the bigger news story here, not necessarily what's going on at Asahi. If anything, I would say not much is going to change, or it's not going to diverge from where they were already going, because Herman's got the same role. Nishino-san has more responsibility, but for the most part, it seems like they are still pressing forward with what they already established in June 2024. All right, moving on to some PlayStation Studios news, beginning with our mandatory annual story from San Diego Studio, which is MLB The Show 25, having a formal reveal with 3 cover athletes, so multiple athletes this time around, and also coming to PlayStation 5, Series S, X, Nintendo Switch on March 18th. No PlayStation 4, which is interesting given that they are shipping on Switch, and they're allowed, I would assume, to say Nintendo Switch 2, but they're not saying that right now. But weird that like you're doing a very low-powered Switch version, not PS4. Kind of goes into like what I mentioned prior, where it's like at a certain point, even if a PS4 version is something they could easily do, if they're not selling enough copies on that version, then they'll probably just skip it. But we also know that the game is not going to be available on any platform subscription services in 2025, which ever since the MLB Association stepped in and Sony agreed to keep making the game and ship it on Xbox, then the game was going on Game Pass every year, which was a really crazy thing to see unfold, but now that is not happening. So we don't know why. We always assumed that the MLB Association was the reason why Microsoft was able to get that agreement in the first place, despite Sony making and shipping the game. They really sort of lost their leverage here if they want to keep making the game. So Microsoft probably just doesn't want to pay for it anymore, which maybe is more indicative of Microsoft unwilling to do some Game Pass deals, or maybe also MLB asking a lot of money. We don't know, but anyway, it's all on a level playing field going into this year for MLB The Show. Moving on to Arrowhead Game Studios, where the creative director on the franchise, Johan Pielstedt, announced he's taking a sabbatical for a while after 11 years on this franchise with the studio, working originally on the PS3, 4, Vita, and Steam version, then going on to the second one. He openly admits that he's spent a lot of time and will set aside his family, friends, himself. He's been working on this franchise for the most part the entire way through, and so he wants to now take time to redeem what was lost lost. And he also says that when he comes back, they will start working on the next Arrowhead game. I'll tell you, every time I hear about a sabbatical, it's like, okay, that's an extended leave from work. A lot of the time they don't come back. It's like they realize what life is like outside of this thing they were grueling over for 10 plus years, whatever the case is. And a lot of the time these guys never come back. But we'll see what happens. I mean, the thing is, if he doesn't, good for him. Spending that much time on this franchise, and I mean, we hear it a lot. There's so many horror stories in the games business as far as what you sacrifice to make things work, whether it is games or not. I mean, there are certain jobs that you just slave over for a long time. They end up owning you, and even if you do see success on the other side, sometimes you look back and you think, was it really worth it? So, I mean, good for him taking some time off. And, excuse me, if he does come back, then at least we will now know that's, hey, a good indicator that Arrowhead's probably doing their next thing, which it'll be fascinating to see what Arrowhead does get themselves into for their next project, considering they have such a long-standing, you would think, quite healthy relationship with PlayStation. They were really a big financial backer of this franchise, and more so for Helldivers 2, doubling the time and budget to make sure the game goes out the door. So we'll see what happens with Arrowhead, and best of luck with Johan. I hope you enjoy your time off. Next up, we have a very big rumor here for the next entry in the God of War franchise. This comes from Daniel Rickman, or Daniel RPK, over on their Patreon, well known for primarily leaking in the Marvel movie entertainment space. Sometimes they do games, but we also like to add this qualifier here of, I don't follow their work too closely, so I can't really vouch for that. I always hear that they're very hit or miss in terms of when they do post these things. So having said that, we'll at least humor the rumor, which they are claiming Sony is currently casting Middle Eastern actors for an unknown AAA title, which Daniel says the project is likely to be the next God of War series, or entry in the series that explores Egyptian mythology. So outside of the source being dubious, what we can say is that Santa Monica has absolutely explored Egyptian mythology before. If I remember correctly, the reason why they decided against it for, well, what would have been before the Norse games is that I guess the environments would have looked very samey, and maybe they just weren't really feeling that direction, so that's why they did Norse. But now Norse is done, they've done Greek, so there's many other things they can explore at this point, so maybe they're finally coming around to the idea of settling on Egyptian mythology, which I can get behind. I mean, the thing is, at this point with God of War, I loved Ragnarok, I loved the 2018 game, I love where they're taking the franchise, and there's just so many ways it can go now, and so it'll be a really fresh thing for them to explore anything different at this point, right, from what we typically expect from God of War at this point. So, I mean, I do feel like that might be the direction they end up taking, and they are very likely, settled on that idea at this point. So not to say the game's like far along in development or anything, it's probably very far away, but they probably are in a place where they know where it's being set, and maybe it is in Egyptian mythos. Having said that, we can also add some very small stories here, which is a recent update for God of War Ragnarok, where you can now access the Black Bear armor set right away instead of being locked behind New Game Plus. You can access it by opening a chest that will sometimes give you lost items, and then you can also access the transmog ability right away as well, instead of having to fully upgrade your armor first. Okay, moving on to some third-party announcements. Let's talk about Phantom Blade Zero, where we got more details for this game from various Chinese publications. The key points to know: the game will have 4 difficulty settings, from easy to very hard, so it's not going to be a full-blown Souls experience where there's only one way to play it. The main story is expected to be 20 to 30 hours, with another 20 hours of side content, and there's also hidden bosses you can encounter when doing a separate mode that lets you fight previously defeated bosses, which I love that. I don't know why, but I'm always so drawn to games that will be a little bit more open as far as what you can do and explore, but sometimes there's either a separate mode, or I like more when it's like baked right into like the main path of the game or something, or rather not main path, but it's like in the campaign where you can go off the beaten path and find some like hyper mega crazy boss that's not talked about at all, and it's like way harder than anything in the game. And so I always really like that. It kind of sounds similar to what they're going for there, but yeah, I mean, it's good that there's difficulty options. I know that does turn off a lot of people, and I generally like the amount of time that they're outlining here. I'm not always on board with games that are like 100 plus hours long. So if we're talking about a game that's 20 to 30 hours and you've got a decent amount of side content in there that doesn't feel too bloated, then yeah, I think this game is shaping up to be quite nice. Next up, this is something I forgot to mention on LTPS last week for our Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 story, but I really wanted to mention it here, which is speaking with 4Gamer, we also had Yoshinori Kitase mention that Part 3 Remake is not going to be exclusive to PlayStation 6. He's just, clarifying that yes, this game, when it comes out, will be for the current cycle, which is PlayStation 5. And the thing is, I'm sure we all expected that would probably be the case anyway. It's going to be a late life cycle PS5 game, and let's say, 2027 at some point, which PS6 would be right around the corner as well. But the thing is, depending on when the game comes out and where, if the PS6 version is not available right away, or if we don't know if it's coming just yet, I'm just being more mindful of this late life cycle that PS5 will be getting into by 26 and 7. There are a lot of games where I will probably just be yeah, that's going to get a PSX version, and I won't even bother playing it right away, because I think we all are expecting there will be a ton of cross-gen games, and we've all got backlogs anyway. I've got so many games to play, it's ridiculous. So I am kind of in a place where I might want to just choose to ignore a lot of these high-profile PS5 games that come out in, let's say, the last year or so, if only because I'm probably going to just want to play them on PlayStation 6 anyway. And I feel like the third entry for 7 is going to be the kind of title that is absolutely going to do that, potentially with more content thrown in there as well, because that's another habit that I just generally, if I get to a game, I want it to be feature complete, or rather content complete. I don't even necessarily have to be in a place where it's I want to buy the complete edition and I want it all packaged there. Whether it's that or I have to buy the content on PSN, I don't care. I just want to get to the game when it's done getting new content. Really bothers me when I play something through its entirety, put it down, then it gets 2 or 3 new DLC packs, and it's man. I'll go back and play it, but now it's going to take a lot longer for me to do that. Moving on to a news item that we were all expecting would eventually happen, and it finally did. The Band-Aid is off. A well-known Xbox IP making the jump to PlayStation, and that is Forza Horizon 5, which this goes right back to our recent Wednesday conversation about where Microsoft is right now. The one quote that was getting thrown around a lot this week over on Gamertag Radio was the Microsoft CEO of gaming, Phil Spencer, saying that we love our platform and our hardware, but we're not going to put up walls where people can engage with great games our studios are building. And so now we had this news from just yesterday. So Forza 5 is coming this spring, developed by Panic Button in partnership with Turn 10 and Playground Games. It'll have the same content as the Xbox and PC version, and all previous car packs and expansions will be available to purchase as well. And they're also working on a new free content update for all versions called Horizon Realms, which this is the one surprising news story. We also have the conversation Phil had on Destin Legary's channel, where he was asked about, Starfield. Destin asked, can you solidify that Starfield is staying put for the time being? And Phil's answer was no, just straight up no. And then, did his usual PR spiel about where they are right now as a business. But this is what we were waiting for, is the, very recognizable Xbox IP, part of the big three, as it were, that being your Forza, Gears, and Halo, one of them coming over to PlayStation. Apparently, Jez Corden is saying that the Master Chief Collection is the next one, so Gears would be the final one. But, yeah, we're here. It's kind of what I was saying with the Tuesday news. I don't find it to be news. How many times can Phil say this? At a certain point, I'm sure a lot of you are tired of it. I'm kind of tired of it. It's still really fascinating to see play out, and this was the really big thing we were waiting on. But how many times does this guy have to say that we're basically going multi-platform and it not be news? It's going to be like this for a long time, honestly, until we do have everything finally available on PlayStation. And Halo will definitely be the big one, no doubt about that. But having said that, Horizon is very fun. It's super arcadey. A lot of PlayStation fans, if you've never played Forza Horizon, it's not simulation based. It's open world arcade racing. It looks very similar to MotorStorm, and it can feel like MotorStorm in a lot of ways. So, I mean, if you've not played this game, it is very fun. You can sink a lot of time into it, and it is absolutely a great title. You should probably wishlist. It is something where if your eyes weren't on it before because it was on Xbox, well, now you can really take a gander at it on PlayStation. Moving on to Shuhei Yoshida, where so far he's been a complete open book after leaving SIE. Love it. Also funny was he shared this image on Twitter where he had to go back to the company for something and he was a visitor, so he had to get a visitor pass, which must have felt very weird for him considering he's been going to that building, or rather just working there for so long in that building for such a long time. So that was funny, but recently he was speaking with IGN Japan, and so this was translated by Genki_JPN on Twitter. Shuhei gave more context on that 11-year development cycle for The Last Guardian. So he explained that Fumito Ueda's vision for the game was that they wanted Trico to move realistically, but the PS3 just was not giving them the headroom needed to make that happen. The performance was not there for the large characters, the large character in the environment, so it was running like 10 to 15 frames per second, so they had to move the game over to PS4 basically and redo all the code. And so Shuhei said that if it was another publisher, the game probably would get canceled, but he decided that whatever happens, they had to release it. I'm fairly certain we've heard this story before. I can't remember when or where, but I believe it was that, like, exactly that word for word was that the game was running like just dog water on PlayStation 3, and they made the conscious choice to throw everything away and move it over to PlayStation 4, and that's why it took as long as it did. But if you didn't hear it, there you go. It's always a really cool story to know that that game had a ton of issues, but Shuhei really wanted to see it through. And also making that bold statement of like, yeah, if this was somebody else, I don't think they would have seen this thing over the finish line, but I just really wanted to make sure it happened. Moving on to some news for PlayStation Productions, we're hearing from The Hollywood Reporter that the director Zach Krieger is working on a reboot for Resident Evil, which the film rights are with Constantine Film, and they're going to produce it with the help of PlayStation Productions. So right now, we're also hearing that there's a bidding war going on, which includes Warner Brothers and Netflix, to get the rights to do this film. And it's interesting because this is the first PS production that's not a PlayStation IP, although I'm sure they're not opposed to that, obviously. They're there to facilitate the video game to movie or TV show adaptation, so it sounds like PS Productions is there to really handle anything if the work comes their way. So this will be interesting to see play out. Now, you all know, not an RE guy myself, and I have barely seen the movies. I've heard that people actually enjoy the ones that were already done, so they might not even really fall under that sort of label of like, oh, video game movies are always bad. I always hear people enjoy those movies. So I don't know if it makes sense to say that this one could actually be really good, or the good one, or it's going to be better than the previous ones. But in theory, with all this renewed vigor of doing like genuinely decent video game adaptations, maybe this one will rise far above the occasion and deliver in a way that the old ones didn't. Now, in other not PlayStation Productions news, we can also talk about this report from Deadline, where Elliot Page's company, Pageboy Productions, has acquired the rights to Beyond Two Souls from Quantic Dream to adapt the game into a TV series. Which, the only weird thing about this, or rather there's two, which, you know, Elliot had a falling out with the studio back when there was that whole thing where there was a naked model in the game and they didn't consent to that, and that was a whole big issue, so I guess they've cleared that up. And then also, I thought all these IPs still belonged to Sony. I don't remember when they, if they gave them back or sold them back or something like that. I mean, this was a 3-game deal that Sony had with Quantic at the time for what was Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls, and Detroit Become Human. Obviously, they were published on PC from somebody else, but I thought for a long time, like, Sony still owned these games outright, so I must have missed when they were sold back or something, so that was the only other surprising thing to me. But this game, you know, I will say, it's the one Quantic game I only played once, never went back to the Platinum, so I don't really remember, well, I remember the rough synopsis of the plot line, but I don't really remember where it diverged and the different endings you could get. I remember enjoying it, though. though. But I've always wanted to go back and sort of get a fresh take on it, since a lot of people do tend to agree that's like the weakest one out of the 3 titles. And I guess I would agree, but I only went through it once, whereas Heavy Rain I played a ton to get the platinum, and Detroit, I didn't platinum that, but I did see a lot of different ways the story could go, and I do really enjoy that one. That one's easily my favorite. But Beyond, yeah, I got to go back to Beyond and see through it again. More so just to clean up that platinum, but to also get a fresh take on that story. Because for TV, I guess that could go somewhere. I mean, if it's enjoyable and it's exposed to a bigger audience, which I think a lot of people did not really see that game. So there probably is an addressable audience that Elliot wants to see this game through, since they apparently also really enjoyed their time working on it. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all. And we had 2 separate news stories that we did for other uploads. One on Sunday going over the physical media landscape, so how many digital edition PS5 Sony is now selling and what's going on with physical games. And then on Tuesday, we did that talk about Phil Spencer's recent comments about wanting to build a really good box that could beat the other guy in theory, but that's also in face of now shipping their games on the competitor as well, so we had to talk about that. And then coming up, probably another Tuesday video on time as well, but also we have Click R3 coming probably Wednesday or Thursday, so you can be on the lookout for that. And I think that's about it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.